Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we will look into how you can use Jest to test your React components. If you are someone who have been avoiding writing test or you copy the test from somewhere and just make it work and do not fully understand it, this video is for you. So in this video we will look how to write Jest tests and what is the difference between all those getBy, findBy, queryBy, and how can you mock functions or APIs and what SpyOn does when you actually reach it. We will do all of those things using one React component. So let's go. So Jest is basically a testing library which actually runs your test and check what has passed or failed and let you know. So as you can see, I have already set up Jest in my project and I have already created a user card.test.jsx. So all of your files that you want to make sure that the Jest tests it, uh, it should have a suffix of .test.js or .test.jsx or ts or tsx. Depends on if you are using TypeScript or not. So Jest has basically three building blocks. I can it has three building blocks. So one is describe, and you, for example, I will name it. So the first parameter of describe is the name of the test, and the second will be a callback function in which all of your tests are raised. So this building block is really optional, but it's good that you use it because it groups all of your test in one component. So the purpose of describe is that it all of the test, groups the test. The second main component is that actually the test itself. So it also, the first parameter is the name of the test. Um, you can name it something like renders user card something, and it also have a callback function in which you will actually write the test. And the third is, instead of test you can also use it does the same thing. I can copy and paste and just replace it with test, and it's just an alternative to what test does. So in every test, what you will do is basically more or less same. So what you will do is set up the component, do some act upon it. So do something with the component, and lastly check the result. So check the result. So now let's look the component that we will be testing. So I have already created a user card component for testing. So you can see that we have const details, which is a state. There is a loading state, there is a error state, there is a handle load detail functions, which sets the loading to true. Then it fetches the user details. It sets the details if the call fails. So there is a try catch. It sets the error and then sets loading to false. And the div actually, and what the component actually renders is it actually renders first the heading with the user and the user ID. So the user ID is a prop to that card. It has a loading state. It has an error state, and if there are details, it will render the details. And there are basically two buttons. So first button will, when you click in load details, it will call the handle load details function, which will eventually fetch the user details. And the second button is actually the delete user button, and it accepts another parameter which will pass to it this component on delete, and it accepts that function. Uh, so let's start with our first test. I will go back to the user card test. I will remove this it test, and so the first test would be that it renders the user ID in the heading. So what we are testing is whenever we load this component, it should, regardless, it should load a heading with a user and pass it a user ID. So first what we will do is we will render this component for testing. So for this we will use the render from the React testing library. So I'm using React testing library so that the Jest knows how to parse the React. I will add a user card to it, and so the user card basically accepts two props, the user ID and on delete. So I will pass the user ID to it. I will say it's for example 42 or something, and on delete I will call jest own jest function. So this is something that we render. So what would be the next step? Now we want to check that if the heading is being rendered or not. So what we expect from jest. So we want to check if the you if so we want to check if there is a user ID, user colon user ID. So user colon, since we pass 42 here, it renders user colon 42 in the HTML component. So what we can do is we can use screen dot get uh wait second. So what we can do is we can use a screen. So we can import a screen from React testing library, and we get all of these uh, functions that we can use. So the easiest way to test a text is you can get by text, and what you will do is pass in a string. I will pass user colon 42 to be the test. One thing I want you guys to know that I am using a VS Code extension that makes actually my life easier. You I can search. So there is a extension which the name is jest/v test runner. So what is it does is it gives you this run button above the test, all of these. So I can run the whole group as well as the test individually. So it makes my life easier. I don't want to run all of my tests at the same time just to check if the test is working or not. I've also set up a script in my package.json, but I actually, if I don't want to test the whole suite of tests, I just um, keep my life simple and just run the test. So, and so, so what do we want? What we want it to be in the document. So in the document, we will call it function. So what we expect from this render is the screen. So this text should be in the document. And now if I run the test, give me a second, I will run it again. It takes a couple of seconds to run. Yeah. So now you see that 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 I have a tick mark. So one test is passed. So this test is passed. So it performs it correctly. So one improvement that I would like to do in my test, I don't write these screen dot get by or find by query by directly inline on the expect. So I create an variable for it usually. So what I can do is I can use const heading, and I can paste it here, and if I do it like this and run the test again, So you can see it started running the test and it's give the same result. One more thing that what I can do or what we can do is not just check if the text is available or not, it should be a part of a heading. So instead of get by text, what I can do is I can use get by role. And the first parameter would be the heading because it is a heading h2. And the second parameter would be an object. So I will make this an object and the name would be user 42. So if I run this test again, you will see that the test has passed. So I feel like it's better to use the get by role if you want to test something specific if it is in a specifically it is showing in the heading or not. Now let's move to the difference between all of these get by role and I can do query by role as well. I can do find by all as well. So I can write back. So get by role is basically your default, or you can say it would be your go-to in every case, in most of the case basically. So basically what get by does is it throws an error if the component is not there. So for example, our loading component, our loading text is only rendered when the loading is set to true. And if I want to check that if the loading is not in the document right now, so what I can do is I can try it with loading. I can do screen dot get by text and I will do loading like this. And I'm expecting it that loading loading is not to be in the document. Correct? So until unless I click this load details button, the loading state will be false and will be no loading showing. So if I want to test this and if I run this test again, you will see that it should throw an error that the loading text is not there. For this, I will need to replace it with query by text. So what query by text does, instead of throwing an error, it returns a null. So now if I run the test, you will see that it has passed correctly. And thirdly, so it so get by role throws error if the element is not found. Sorry, I will get by role. I will do it get by. The second would be query by. Query by will return null. So if you want to check something that is not in the document right now, uh, you will use query by instead of get by. Returns null uh, if the element is not found. And lastly, find by. So find by actually returns a promise. So it waits for some time to see if the element is there or not, and after the timeout, if the element is not there, it will throw an error. So basically if there is a case where uh, you click on something or the element renders after a couple of milliseconds, what you can do is you can use find by there. So what findBy do is returns a promise, usually waits up to a second. So now we will move to the next more advanced step, which is mocking the APIs or mocking a function. So in our case, if you look at when we click handle load details function, it actually calls fetch user details, which is an actual API, which will be an actual API that you will be calling to fetch the user details based on the user ID. And for test, we actually don't want to do that. So you will say that okay, this is just a fetch request, but if you look at it via post or a delete request, what you will see is that you actually don't want to delete the actual user or update any details on actual users while running the tests. So in this case, what we can do is we can mock this fetch user details and check if the values that it returns are correct or not. So I will start with writing another test. So the next test would be that it shows the user details when user click on load details button. Correct? And what I will do is I will add a callback function to it. So firstly, what we want to do is we will render the user card. I can copy this from the previous test. I want to get the button by its role. So I will copy this as well just to make our lives easier. I will rename it to button, and the name would be load details. So, and now what we want to do? We want to actually click on this button. So how would we do that? So to make it able to click the button, we need to set up one thing. So we will use const user. We will import user event from user testing library and call the setup. And in this user, what we can do is, so this user, so it's basically create the user event. And what we can do is user can click this button, correct? So now since the user dot click is a promise, we need to await it, and I will make this function async. After clicking it, what we want is we want to check if the name and email is there or not. So I can do is I can create a name and I can do screen dot uh, get by text, and it would be name colon something something. Right now I will put it dot and const email, correct, and I will expect them both of them to be in the string in the document, to be in the document, and also expect email to be in the document. So right now if we run this test, it will actually call when the user clicks on the load details button, it will actually call the fetch user details API. Now what we want to do is we want to mock this API so we can return a result that we actually need to test. So it actually does. So what the result that the API actually returns. So we will basically create a mock of that result, and we will test the our test on behalf of that result. So we can see that fetch user details is coming from API. So I've created a folder .api, and in that folder I have fetch user details. So what we can do is at the top of our test we can jest.mock, correct. What this will do is tell jest that everything inside mock, this path, you have to replace it with jest function. So what basically jest function does, jest function is nothing, just no, a function that returns undefined, it does nothing. So now we will tell the mock what we need to do. So what I can do is I can use fetch user details, and since we know that the fetch user details actually returns a promise, we will do is mock resolved value, and what it will return, it will return as a name. I will say it's Jane Doe, and the email would be Jane Doe, Jane Doe at example.com. I've imported, yes. So the fetch user details has been imported, and now what we can update this name. So this name would be um, give me a second. I actually Jane Doe, and the email would be Jane Doe at example.com. Correct. And if I now run this test, you will see that we have skipped one test because I actually run only this test. So this one was skipped, and the second test was part. So show the user details when I will change it to, sorry. So it's show when the user clicks on the load detail. So what we do is we mock this fetch user details to return a resolved value, which is a promise value, and we call the render, so it will render the user card. So, and when we click on this load details button, it actually we check, sorry, we check that these name and email are in the document or not then afterwards. So now, for example, if the fetch user details, if we want to test that if fetch user details throws an error, so we want to show that the error is there or not. So what we can do now is I will copy this test again, correct, and I will rename it to that that the test shows the error when API call throws an error. So here instead of doing a mock resolved value, we will do a mock rejected value. So mock rejected value, and in this value what we can do is we can throw a new error, and I will do is, for example, I will say it's a network error. And now we will do the same, that we render the user card, get the button, user clicks on the button, and instead of getting the name and email, we should see that okay, this text should be there, that fail to load details text should be there. So I will copy this text, I will remove them, the name, and so what I can do is I can do is const error, so I can get screen dot get by text. I will paste the text here, and I expect that error to be in the document. Perfect. And if I now run this test, So you can see that we get this error when the API basically throws an error. Let's move to the next text. So the next test, we would see that when the user clicks on delete, it actually calls the on delete function with the user ID of whatever we have passed. So here, if we pass 42, it should call it with 42. So I can again copy this test, and what we can do is calls on delete with user ID when the delete button is clicked. Correct? And so I will get the button name. The button name is delete user. Correct? And when the user clicks on it, I want to check if if actually this function that we passed is called or not. So what I will do is I will extract this function from here. I will name it, for example, mock delete, and I will pass this mock delete to this user card. And now we want to test when the user clicks on button that how many times this function was called, and secondly, if it was called with the same user ID that we passed or not. So what we can do is we can expect mock delete to be called to have been called times 1, and expect mock delete to have been called with 42. And if I now run this test, you can see that it passes. So what basically mock delete did? So basically it creates when we use jest functions, it basically creates a function that I've already mentioned that returns undefined. But the purpose of this function that it also tracks what has been passed in as the parameters to these functions and how many times this function have been called. So that's why we are able to track that okay, this function has been called with this parameter which is 42, and it has been called only one time, which is what we needed. So that's how you test this jest function. Now we will look into what spy-on is and how it is different from mock in jest, because they both look very similar if you look at them from the first glance. So spy-on is used when you actually want to watch a function that exists in an object, but you do not necessarily want to replace it. And sometimes using mock on these sort of things doesn't make things complex. So in this scenario that you want to use spy on. So let's see how we can use spy on exactly. So instead of just calling the API, I will update the user card function. So instead of using fetch users from API, what I will do is I will import. I have created an API service, and inside an API service object, I have fetch user details. It's just a timeout promise, and then it returns John Doe as an object. So what I will do is I will import it. I will do API service from API service, and here I will use API service dot fetch user details. So here we cannot directly replace API service with a mock, we need to actually spy on this fetch user details and then replace its value with a mock value. So in the user card test, what I will do is now I will create another test. I will name it shows user details after loading. Since we want to click on the button, I will make it async beforehand. Uh, I will create a user event similarly to the previous one. I will render the user card. I will copy the one from above. Load details button, update, copy all of these. And instead of what we did here, where is it exactly? Yeah. Fetch user details mock resolve value. We want to spy on the API service and specifically on this fetch user details function. So here what I can do is I can create a variable called spy, and I will do just dot spy on. I will tell it that it will use API service, and then that API service, the second parameter would be fetch user details, and it will also return a mock resolved value, and I will copy the mock resolved value from here. Should be the same. Perfect. And so after clicking the button, what things should we expect? We should expect exactly the same stuff that we did previously with the mocking. So the name and email should be there, and also what we can do, we can say that we can expect spy to have been called with 42. So this was previously not possible, I think, with mock. I'm not confirmed, but um, as far as I remember, that this is only possible when you spy on something. And in the end, we want to restore the mock. So what we can do is spy dot mock restore. So if we don't restore it, it will basically it might affect the next test and give us the results that we do not want. So that's why we need to restore the spy. So this resolve value at the end. So now if I run this test, you see that it's passed. Now if you look at this test, and for example, if you are doing a spy in multiple of your tests, and at the end you have to dot mock restore in every test, one good practice is that instead of mock restore, at the end what you can do is at the top of the test under the describe, what you can do is there is a built-in function after each, and this expects a callback function, and in this function you can pass jest dot mock jest dot restore all mocks. So it does the same, but instead of you writing every time that the spy should be mock restore, and sometimes if you forgot it and the test starts behaving differently, it's better to write it this way. So actually this after each this this callback function run after each test. So if I run this whole group together, so after when this test runs, it restore all the mocks regardless. So this is one of the best practices that you can use. So if I now run this test again, you will see that the test has passed. So basically, that's more or less that you will need to know while working with Jest. If you want to have more insights or uh, want me to cover some advanced topics related to Jest, let me know in the comments and see you in the next one. Thank you.